I'm about to take you through a list of things to try if you're having problems with one or both of your thumbsticks on your Xbox Elite Series 2 controller. Problems such as these, which includes what is collectively known as drift. I'll start by showing easy methods that may help resolve your issue, and then work my way up to more difficult ones that involve taking the controller apart and taking bigger risks. So start with the first method I show you and continue through my list until your problem is solved or until you reach the end of your comfort level. Note, there's no guarantee that these methods will work, but according to feedback I get on my previous videos, I estimate that about 80% of you will see some type of improvement from doing things I mentioned in this video. This first one is going to seem bizarre, but bear with me here. Hold the controller in the air and tilt it at a 45-degree angle. And then for whatever stick is giving you the issue, push that stick toward the ceiling and then tap the back of your controller right across from that analog stick that's giving you the issue. And then just keep tapping it for a while and keep holding it at a 45-degree angle. The reason I'm making you do this is because that thumbstick is basically a metal box with the stick sticking out of it. And what happens is that dirt and debris migrate into that metal box and it can cause drift. So by slapping the back of your controller, we are hoping to dislodge any dirt that may be in there. And by tilting it at an angle, we're trying to make sure that that dirt doesn't get caught in the rounded plastic part that's underneath the stick. If it does get caught in there, you might just dump the dirt right back into the metal box. Test your controller and see if it solved the issue. If not, proceed to the next method. This next one's going to seem bizarre as well. Take a piece of cardboard from some product from your kitchen and cut a wedge out of it. Then take that wedge and insert it around the thumbstick that's giving you the issue and move it around. And while you're doing that, move the thumbstick in the opposite direction of where you're sticking the wedge in there. The wedge will eventually start to get bent up. In that case, just rotate it and use one of the other corners. The idea here is that dirt gets caught in between the plastic shell of the controller and the plastic that makes up the analog stick. If enough of it is in there, it can disrupt the function of your thumbstick and even cause drift. Once again, test your controller and see if it worked, and if not, proceed to the next method. We're still going to be concentrating on dirt for the time being. This time around, take a straw or something that blows like canned air or an electric blower and blow into that gap around the stick that's giving you the issue. It'll be easier to do this if you remove the top of the stick. And once again, push the stick in the opposite direction of the side that you're blowing into. For this one, you'll want to make sure that the top of both thumbsticks have been removed, and that's because we are going to be using a vacuum cleaner nozzle to do more cleaning, and we don't want those thumbsticks to get sucked up. You're going to just push it up against the problematic stick and stir the stick around while the vacuum cleaner is running. And hopefully it'll suck out any debris that's disrupting your thumbstick. And this is a good follow-up to some of the previous methods where you could have dislodged some debris and it's rattling around in there. Whenever you're testing a controller, you can either use your game or you can go to Gamepad Tester. It's a free site. You simply go directly to this page called Gamepad Tester, then connect your controller via wire or Bluetooth to that device and hit any button on the controller. From there, it'll show indicators every time you press a button or move the analog stick. When you have drift, it can show in a couple of ways on this screen. When at rest, the dot that represents the analog stick may jitter a lot, or the dot may just be off-center when it's at rest. Small amounts of jitter or off-centerness may not affect anything in the game at all. It just depends on how the game is programmed. But large amounts of jitter or off-centerness will cause unintended behavior in the game. A dead zone can help, and I'll get into that in a minute. The cool thing is that you can do this test as you're doing some of these solutions I show you today. I'll put a link to the site in the description below. We've done all the cleaning that we can do from the outside. We do have some non-cleaning things to try before we go inside the controller. And the first one is adjusting your dead zone. What is a dead zone? Well, in that last segment, I showed how your analog stick is represented by a dot, and it could be off-centered or jittery. By adjusting the dead zone, you can tell it to ignore a certain amount of off-centerness or jitteriness. Right here on this PS3 emulator, you can see how the left analog stick is jittery. Actually, both of them are. The red circle you see there is the dead zone. As long as the off-centerness or jitteriness is contained within the red circle, then my controller is going to function fine. If I adjust the sliders, I can increase or decrease the dead zone. If I make it this small, then there would be an issue. My character or the camera would move around. So why not make it super large so you never have an issue? If you do that, you'll be sacrificing precision in most games. It's going to take more of a push to get the controller to register that you're pushing the analog stick. The challenge to this solution is that there is no dead zone setting directly in the Xbox menus. At least not at the time of this video. There may, however, be a dead zone setting within the in-game menu on whatever game you're playing. So go into your controller options within the game and just look around the menus and see if you see anything. If you're playing on Steam, it has a dead zone adjuster built right into the home screen menu. Here's the menu path to get there. If you're unable to use this dead zone feature or it just doesn't work for your problem, proceed to the next method. There's other types of settings that may help resolve your issue, and I'm going to stuff them all within this segment. The first things I show you are going to be within the Xbox console menu, but if you are using your controller on PC, you can find these same settings on the Xbox Accessories app. Go to Settings, and then on the next screen, select Devices and Connections on the left, and Controllers and Headsets on the right. And then select Configure at the bottom, and then select a profile to configure, and click the little pencil to edit that profile. And then at the top, select either left stick or right stick, depending on whichever one's giving you the issue. Then on the bottom left, there's all kinds of settings that you can mess around with that will alter the way your analog stick behaves. Some of these may resolve your issue. I haven't messed around with these that much, so let me know in the comments if you know a setting on this screen that helps solve issues with the analog stick. Here's something else you can change within the same configuration screen, but it's a long shot. This time, select Mapping at the top. That'll take you to this scary looking screen. Select the icon that represents whichever analog stick that you have the issue with, and after you select it, it'll have primary highlighted. Go ahead and select that, and there'll be a little box that comes up. And in there, you can swap the functionality with the other analog stick. This is only gonna help some of you, because most of you probably play first-person shooters or first-person adventure games, and one analog stick is camera and one analog stick is movement. So switching them isn't gonna help. Your character is either gonna be moving around on its own, or the camera is going to be moving around. By the way, as far as I can see on Steam, you cannot switch buttons. If your problem is stuttering or stopping when you're trying to run in a first-person shooter, check your game's menu system for an option called Auto Run. This does have drawbacks. You won't be able to do slow movement in the game anymore. There is one last Hail Mary pass you can throw, and that is to make sure you have updated the firmware on your controller. Some of my viewers have told me that this helps resolve the analog issues. I presume because the update makes an adjustment to a hidden dead zone setting. If you're on console, make sure your Xbox has the latest system update available installed, and after doing that, connect your controller, and for most of you, the console itself will tell you when there's an update on the controller. So if you do get that prompt, go ahead and follow the instructions it gives you. In case you didn't get that message, select Settings, then select Devices and Connections on the left and Controllers and Headsets on the right. Click the three dots. If there's an update available, the first selection will tell you. And if there is one, select it and follow the instructions. If you're on PC, first make sure you have the latest version of Windows installed, then use the Xbox Accessories app to do the things I just mentioned for the console. I have shown you all the non-invasive things I can think of. All the remaining methods involve taking things apart. As you know, this controller is expensive, and because it is, it's also more intricate to work on. Just like before, I'm going to show you the easier methods first, but all of them pose a risk. You may break something. I'm going to be detailed and point out the most dangerous parts of the process, but the risk will never be zero. Just keep that in mind. For this method, we're going to get closer to the thumbstick so we can give it a better cleaning than we did before. To do that, we need to remove the top cover of the controller. It's not held in by screws. It uses very strong tabs and a bit of adhesive. Don't pull it off yet. I want to point some things out. The seam to this top cover runs along the very top of everything. If you notice dirt in that seam, try to get rid of it with your fingernail or something. If it stays in there, it makes it harder to separate. Remove the back bumpers if you happen to have them on. Also remove both thumbstick caps and the D-pad cover. I've done this process 4 times and it's never easy because the cover just doesn't want to come off. I recommend you watch this entire separation sequence before doing it on your own. You'll need some prying tools. I have found it's easiest to start at the bottom, and as you get some separation there, stick some flat things into it to keep it from shutting on you, and then work your way to one of the handles. I recommend working toward the left one. Once you get the corner to be separated, you should have enough leverage to pull the whole thing up. Note the small distance between the B button and the edge of the cover. This is a weak point, and if you put too much pressure on that spot, it'll crack like it did in this one. It's just cosmetic damage, but I just wanted to point that out. The tabs themselves can also break in the process. If so, it'll likely still go back together just fine due to all the other tabs that hold it in place. If a tab does break off, just make sure it doesn't go down into the controller because that can cause some issues. With the cover off, we can now do what was intended with this method, and that is to clean the components that are beneath the dome of the analog stick. If you push it to the side, you'll see the metal box beneath it. Here's what it looks like when it's completely extracted. Note that I'm not actually going to have you extract it. And this one is just a spare part I ordered off Amazon. It's not from an Elite controller, but it does resemble it. One side has a button, and that one gets pushed when you push straight down on the stick. Clean everything as much as you can within the limited space. Start by blowing into it, and then get some alcohol and a Q-tip and stir some alcohol into the stick, especially around the tops of these doors. Now don't get hung up on what percentage of alcohol you need. They will all evaporate quickly, and that's what we need to happen. After you're done with the alcohol, blow into the stick again, just to make sure everything is dried completely. If it's still wet when you test it, the readings will be all over the place. Speaking of testing, you can do it without putting the top back on. Note that the last chapter of this video will show how to reassemble everything. If the last method didn't improve the situation, you'll need to go further in and do the riskiest thing I show you in this video. We're going to remove the dome from the top of the problematic thumbstick. Unlike other controllers, you can't just pull it off. It has to be unscrewed. The thing is, they're on there very tight, and there is apparently some adhesive on the threads, which helps hold it together even more. If you start rotating it, and it doesn't unscrew right at the threads, it instead destroys the entire analog stick. This has been known to happen to people. I'm going to show you a way that minimizes that risk, but I recommend you only proceed if you're desperate, and you're going to throw the controller away if it's not fixed. What we're going to do is apply heat, which should help loosen the adhesive that's on the threads. There's a lot of plastic in the area though, so too much heat will melt things. For that reason, I'm going to use a regular hairdryer as opposed to a heat gun. Since the dryer spreads heat over a wide area, you should protect the surrounding components. One way is to cut a hole in a thick piece of cardboard and use that as a cover. Heat the stick until it's hot enough to be uncomfortable to touch. Then, before it cools, take some pliers and turn it counterclockwise. When you do it enough times, you can then do it by hand for the rest of the way. It does appear that there is adhesive in there when I zoom in on the threads. So now with the domes off, we can proceed with what we're going to do with this method, which is to clean the entire stick again. With everything out of the way, it's much easier to accomplish. I took both of the domes off, but you don't have to. First, I recommend you turn it over and tap on the back like you did in the earlier method. That way, if there's any dirt in that stick, it'll come out and not fall back in again. And then go ahead and clean it with alcohol again. This time you can get a little bit crazier with the alcohol. You can dump a little bit in there. Just make sure you pour out the excess. Also make sure you get some on those green doors and move the stick around as you're doing this. Then dry everything and test it. You can even use the cold setting on the hairdryer to do it. Note that putting the caps back on is covered in the last chapter of this video. If nothing has worked so far, the next step is to open the doors on the stick and clean the traces that are inside. Just like in the previous methods, this one is risky. We have to take things apart further, and these doors are fragile. Remove these screws with a size 8 Torx bit. If nobody has been inside before, one of those screws will be covered by a sticker. If a screw won't turn, try soaking it with 1 drop of water and also tapping on it. Separate and remove the bottom cover. If one of these vibration motors pops out, push it back into place. For whatever reason, on mine, this little bar thingy was stuck on the black padding. I put it back where it should be. We then need to disconnect the green board and flip it over. First, disconnect these tiny wires. The end of each one is snapped onto the green board beneath the black padding. Also remove the D-pad. The metal clamp is latched onto the black plastic at the bottom and at the top. It's best to pull out the bottom first. Remove these 2 screws with a size 6 Torx bit. The LT and RT buttons are too much in the way to flip the board over, so we have to disassemble those. There is a tiny screw in each one that helps hold the motors in place. Remove those screws with a size 6 Torx bit. Your screwdriver also needs to be small in order for it to turn at the angle needed. And there's also a magnet nearby that kind of pulls at the screwdriver as you're turning. Remove the tops of the buttons and just let the motors do whatever they want to do. You will be able to flip the board over now. Keep in mind, there is a connector between the 2 boards, so there's some upward force needed. This jack is going to fall out at some point, so when it does, just set it aside. Don't pull the board out so much that it snaps the wires that are at the edge of the board. We just need to get it into this position. Afterward, put a paper towel underneath to cushion the board and keep it from moving around. If you see debris on the stick, blow it off. As mentioned, we are going to open the doors and clean the traces inside. These doors are fragile, so I recommend you watch the rest of this segment before proceeding, because the details I give you will lessen the risk of breaking them. There's wheels inside those doors, and when you move the stick around, those wheels move. One is the X-axis, left and right, and one is the Y-axis, up and down. For most of you, I recommend you open and work on both doors of the stick that's giving you the issue. However, if your issue only happens when you push in a certain direction, you may be able to get away with just working on one door. If you push the stick in that direction, you can see which wheel turns and just work on that door. The doors have 3 metal prongs on the bottom of them that are soldered onto the board. We are going to bend those when we open the door. The door is also clamped onto the metal box through the use of 2 tabs and 3 pegs. The lower peg we'll refer to as the third peg. It appears on the right side if you're facing it this way. We are going to pry open the door from the top, and when we do it, we want to make sure the third peg comes out smoothly. Otherwise, it'll get very bent and make it hard to close the door. We will begin by lightly pushing on both tabs. There's one on each side. This will help loosen the door's grip on the box. Some of this footage is going to be shaky and it's going to go out of focus sometimes. That's partly because I'm zoomed in. We're going to take the smallest flathead screwdriver we can find and insert it into the seam at the top. At this point, we're not trying to fully open the door, we just want to get it open a little bit. There are two small holes at the top, and putting the corner of the driver into those helps a lot. We will continue to open it up, but as we proceed, we want to stick things deeper into it as we pry, so we're not putting all the force at the top of the door. This will lessen the bending on that third peg. The top two pegs are now out, and I'm going to take a razor blade, because of how flat it is, and stick it deep in there, and use that to pry it out a little bit more. Now I will just use my finger to do the rest. That third peg got a little mangled, but it's going to be okay. We're now going to remove the disc and set it aside. Inside that door is a green trace. Clean it with a Q-tip and alcohol, and then dry everything out. We want to make sure it's 100% dry before we close the door. As for the disc, it's very fragile, so I don't suggest cleaning it unless it looks dirty. And when you do clean it, just wipe it slightly with a Q-tip and alcohol. Those wires along the top need to come out a little bit. If you push down on them too much, they will stay pushed down. We now need to put the disc back into the door. Note that these two dots that are close together need to go into the bottom of the door. If it's not positioned properly, the door won't shut, so just keep trying. As you close the door, put a lot of pressure on the bottom of it. That'll make sure the third peg makes it into its respective hole. It's okay if that peg is a little bit bent, but if it's bent a lot, unbend it. If it's mangled and won't go back into the hole, just go ahead and cut it off. The door should close just fine without it. That's all the methods I have to show you today. If you need help putting everything back together, proceed on to the next chapter. Here's how to put everything back together. I'm going to assume you went all the way to the last method, and I'll also assume that this jack fell off. It goes right here. Then flip the board back over, making sure the two connectors join right here. Screw in these two screws. Then take the LT and RT buttons and place them back into position over the motors. You have to hold each one together as you put the tiny screw back into it. Plug these two wires back into the green board. You have to get each one in a very precise position and push straight down. And when you do it right, it'll snap into place. Put the bottom shell back on. I had to keep messing around with it before it fell into the correct position. Put all these screws back in. Then screw the domes back on. I started by hand, and near the end I tightened them a little bit with pliers, but you don't want to over tighten them. And finally, place the cover back on and snap it into place. I hope you found this video useful. Have a great day, everybody.